On April 12, 2023, a search and rescue operation in the remote northeastern section of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park ended with the discovery of a single survivor. Park Ranger Joseph Blackfeather, 37, was found on an unmarked service road approximately 17 miles from where he and 4 other experienced personnel had begun an off-protocol search for a missing hiker 5 days earlier. The bodies of Senior Ranger Marcus Devereaux, Search and Rescue Specialist Teresa Wong, Tribal Liaison Robert Two Wolves, and wildlife biologist Dr. Elaine Chambers were never recovered. Blackfeather was hospitalized for severe dehydration, unexplained blood loss, and a series of precision lacerations that medical examiners described as inconsistent with any known animal attack pattern. During his 3-week recovery, Blackfeather provided a detailed account of what happened in the unmapped valleys beyond the Pigeon River watershed, in an area locally known as Nantahala Shadowlands. The National Park Service officially attributed the deaths to a combination of hazardous terrain, wildlife encounters, and flash flooding. Blackfeather resigned from his position 6 weeks after his release from hospital care. He has since relocated to western Arizona, where he lives in isolation on the edge of Navajo Nation lands. What follows is his account. My name is Joseph Blackfeather. I was a park ranger with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 11 years before what happened last spring. I am Cherokee on my father's side, though I wasn't raised in the traditional ways. My father left when I was young, and my mother, who is of Scots-Irish descent, raised me in Gatlinburg. I studied forestry and wildlife management at the University of Tennessee before joining the Park Service. I was good at my job. I knew every trail, every ridge, every waterway in my jurisdiction. I'd responded to over 70 search and rescue operations in my career. I had never lost a person under my watch until April of last year. I need to tell you about the others first. You should know who they were before I tell you how they died. Marcus Devereaux was our team leader, 52 years old, 26 years with the Park Service, 6'3", built like an oak tree, with this gray-streaked beard he kept perfectly trimmed. Former Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Marcus could track anything through any terrain. He had this quiet confidence that made everyone feel safe. When Marcus was on your team, you knew you were coming home. He had 3 grown children and a wife who made the best apple pie in Tennessee. They'd just bought land in North Carolina where they planned to build their retirement home. Teresa Wong was 34, 5 years with our specialized search and rescue unit after transferring from Yosemite. 5'6", compact and strong, with this mathematical precision to everything she did. Teresa could look at a map once and memorize it completely. She had specialized training in high-angle rescue and wilderness medicine. 2 master's degrees, 1 in emergency management, 1 in alpine ecology. She was engaged to an emergency room doctor in Asheville. Their wedding was scheduled for September. I'd already bought them a handmade quilt as a gift. My name is Joseph Blackfeather. I was a park ranger with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 11 years before what happened last spring. I am Cherokee on my father's side, though I wasn't raised in the traditional ways. My father left when I was young, and my mother, who is of Scots-Irish descent, raised me in Gatlinburg. I studied forestry and wildlife management at the University of Tennessee before joining the Park Service. I was good at my job. I knew every trail, every ridge, every waterway in my jurisdiction. I'd responded to over 70 search and rescue operations in my career. I had never lost a person under my watch until April of last year. I need to tell you about the others first. You should know who they were before I tell you how they died. Marcus Devereaux was our team leader, 52 years old, 26 years with the Park Service. 6'3", built like an oak tree, with this gray-streaked beard he kept perfectly trimmed. Former Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Marcus could track anything through any terrain. He had this quiet confidence that made everyone feel safe. When Marcus was on your team, you knew you were coming home. He had 3 grown children and a wife who made the best apple pie in Tennessee. They'd just bought land in North Carolina where they planned to build their retirement home. Teresa Wong was 34, 5 years with our specialized search and rescue unit after transferring from Yosemite. 5'6", compact and strong, with this mathematical precision to everything she did. Teresa could look at a map once and memorize it completely. She had specialized training in high-angle rescue and wilderness medicine. 2 master's degrees, one in emergency management, one in alpine ecology. She was engaged to an emergency room doctor in Asheville. Their wedding was scheduled for September. I'd already bought them a handmade quilt as a gift. Robert, 2 wolves, served as our tribal liaison. 43 years old, Cherokee Nation citizen who grew up on the Kuala boundary, 6 feet even, lean and wiry, moved through the forest like he was part of it. Robert knew the old stories, the places where our ancestors said not to go. He had this way of talking about the mountains that made you realize how young and ignorant you were. His grandfather had been a medicine man, and though Robert didn't practice those traditions himself, he respected them. He had a teenage daughter who played basketball and wanted to be a forest ranger, like her dad. Dr. Elaine Chambers was our wildlife biologist, 47 years old, on special assignment from the Department of Interior to study predator populations in the park. 5'10", athletic, with short grey-blonde hair and these intense blue eyes that missed nothing. 20 years of field experience across 3 continents. PhD from Cornell, published author, world-renowned expert on apex predator behavior. Elaine carried a Nikon camera everywhere and documented everything meticulously. She had survived a grizzly attack in Glacier National Park 6 years earlier. The scars ran from her left shoulder down to her elbow. She wasn't afraid of anything in those mountains. She should have been. The search began because of a missing hiker named Michael Strand, 26 years old, experienced backpacker from Michigan who had set out alone on the Appalachian Trail section that cuts through the park. His girlfriend reported him missing when he didn't check in after 3 days. That wasn't unusual in itself. Cell service is spotty at best, and hikers often go longer without contact, but Michael had been meticulously consistent with his check-ins during previous trips. The girlfriend was concerned enough that we took it seriously from the start. We found Michael's last confirmed location at a trail shelter near Tricorner Knob. The logbook showed his entry from 5 nights earlier. Beautiful sunset tonight, heading off trail tomorrow to photograph the valley below. Should rejoin the AT by nightfall. Standard procedure would have been to search the immediate surroundings, then extend outward along the most likely routes a hiker might take. But the logbook entry concerned me. The valley he was referring to was likely Lower Town Gap, and parts of it extended into what the Cherokee call Tsistuyi Ivwi, the Forbidden Territory. I should explain about this place. The official park maps show trails and landmarks throughout the Smokies, but there are regions deliberately left unmarked, places where the Cherokee and earlier peoples knew not to go. My grandmother, my father's mother, used to tell me stories about Tsistuyi Ivwi when I was a child during my occasional visits to her. The old ones sleep there, she would say. They were here before us, before the mountains grew. They sleep, but sometimes they get hungry. I thought they were just stories meant to keep children from wandering too far from home. Most of the other rangers treated these areas as simply too rugged for recreational use or as protected habitats for endangered species, but the tribal elders knew better. I mentioned my concerns to Marcus during the initial briefing. He listened carefully, as he always did, when I brought up anything related to Cherokee traditions. Marcus respected indigenous knowledge, not in that superficial way some people do, but genuinely. He had worked with tribes across the country during his career. What exactly is the concern, Joe? He asked me privately after the briefing. I told him about the stories, about my grandmother's warnings, about how the tribal records showed no settlements ever established in that particular valley despite its water sources and sheltered position, about how game animals avoided the area, according to both traditional knowledge and our own wildlife surveys. Marcus didn't dismiss it. He made a note in his field book and said, "We'll be cautious, but we need to check every possible location where this young man might have gone." The morning we set out, Robert pulled me aside as we were loading our gear into the Park Service SUVs. My grandfather would burn sage before entering that valley. he said quietly. He would make offerings at the boundary stones. I could tell Robert was uncomfortable, but like me, he had a job to do. His discomfort made mine worse. If someone with his traditional upbringing was concerned, I knew my grandmother's stories weren't just superstition. We drove as far as the service roads would take us, then hiked 4 hours to reach the shelter where Michael had last signed in. The weather was perfect. Clear blue skies, temperature in the low 60s, slight breeze from the northwest. We established our base camp near the shelter and conducted interviews with 2 hikers who remembered seeing Michael. They confirmed he had mentioned wanting to photograph the valley for his Instagram account. One of them had warned him about the difficult terrain and lack of marked trails, but Michael had seemed confident in his abilities. Marcus divided us into search pairs, him with Elaine, me with Robert, and Teresa coordinating from base camp with her communications equipment. We would conduct an initial sweep of the ridge line, overlooking the valley, looking for any sign that Michael had descended, then decide whether entering the valley itself was necessary. We each carried standard search and rescue gear, first aid kits, extra water, high-protein rations, emergency shelters, flare guns, radios, GPS units. Elaine brought additional wildlife monitoring equipment, including trail cameras and audio recorders for her ongoing predator study. The ridge search took the rest of that first day. We found nothing conclusive, though Elaine noted an unusual absence of bird activity along the eastern slope. We regrouped at base camp as the sun was setting, comparing notes and planning the next day's operation. The decision was made to enter the valley at first light, with Teresa joining us rather than remaining at base camp. We would move in a coordinated sweep pattern, maintaining visual or radio contact at all times. I slept poorly that night. The forest was too quiet. April in the Smokies should be filled with sounds: spring peepers, barred owls, the rustle of small nocturnal mammals. But around our camp there was nothing but the occasional gust of wind through the treetops. When I mentioned this to Elaine during my watch shift, she confirmed it was unusual. The wildlife density readings are abnormally low for this elevation and season, she said, checking her instruments. Could be a predator in the area, bear or mountain lion marking its territory. She didn't sound entirely convinced by her own explanation. Morning came with heavy mist rising from the valley floor, typical for the Smokies, which got their name from that very phenomenon. We ate a quick breakfast, checked our gear, and began our descent into the valley. Robert took the lead, followed by Marcus, then Teresa, Elaine, and me, bringing up the rear. The terrain was challenging, but not exceptional for experienced park personnel. The unmarked status of the area was evident in the lack of human traffic. No worn paths, no cairns, no trace of hikers having passed through before. About 2 hours into our descent, I noticed Robert slowing his pace. He stopped occasionally, looking at the ground, then up at the surrounding forest. Marcus eventually called a brief halt and went to speak with him. I moved up the line to join them. "The forest is wrong," Robert said quietly, gesturing to our surroundings. I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but now that he mentioned it, I saw what he meant. The tree growth patterns were strange. Healthy, mature trees growing in spiraling patterns rather than reaching straight upward toward the sunlight. Undergrowth thinning out despite ideal soil conditions, and most notably the continued absence of wildlife. No birdsong, no squirrels, no insects buzzing around our faces as would be normal on a spring day. Could be a microclimate issue, Elaine suggested, joining our huddle. Soil composition, groundwater contamination, something affecting the local ecosystem. But her furrowed brow told me she didn't believe that explanation any more than Robert did. Marcus made the decision to continue. We still had a missing hiker to find, and unusual forest growth patterns weren't reason enough to abort the search. We adjusted our formation to stay closer together and proceeded deeper into the valley. By midday, we reached what appeared to be the lowest point of the depression. A small stream ran through it, unusually clear and cold for the season. We stopped to filter water and eat a brief lunch. That's when Teresa spotted something along the stream bank about 50 yards downstream. A flash of unnatural color against the browns and greens of the forest floor. It was a backpack, red and black, high-end brand, partially submerged in a small eddy of the stream. Marcus reached it first, pulling it carefully from the water. The identification tag confirmed it belonged to Michael Strand. The contents were mostly intact, waterlogged, but recognizable. Camera equipment in waterproof cases, energy bars, first aid kit, spare clothing, water filter, fire starter kit, everything A prepared hiker should have, but the condition of the backpack disturbed us all. It hadn't simply fallen or been set down. The shoulder straps had been severed, not torn or worn through, but cut cleanly as if with a sharp blade. The back panel showed 5 parallel incisions, evenly spaced, each approximately 4 inches long and cutting completely through the reinforced material. Elaine examined these marks closely, photographing them from multiple angles. Not consistent with bear or mountain lion, she said, her voice professional but tight. The spacing is too precise, the depth too uniform, and there's no sign of teeth marks or saliva residue that would indicate an animal tried to access food contents. Robert stood slightly apart from us, looking not at the backpack but at the surrounding forest. His posture had changed, becoming more rigid, more alert. "We should go," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "We should report this finding and bring in a larger search team tomorrow." Marcus considered this suggestion. Standard procedure would indeed be to retreat with this evidence and organize a more extensive search, but something about the cleanly cut straps bothered him and me. This wasn't a case of equipment failure or animal interference. Someone or something had deliberately removed this backpack from the hiker. "We'll continue for another hour," Marcus decided. "Elaine, secure the backpack for evidence. Everyone stay within visual contact. If we find no additional sign of Michael by 1400 hours, we'll begin our return to base camp." We spread out slightly to search the immediate area, looking for any trail Michael might have taken after losing his backpack. That's when I noticed the silence had deepened. Not just an absence of wildlife sounds, but an absence of all sound. The stream, which had been gurgling steadily, now seemed muffled. The breeze, which had been rustling leaves overhead, stilled completely. Even our own movements seemed quieter, as if the air had thickened around us. Teresa noticed it too. I saw her remove her radio from her belt, press the talk button, then frown. She tried again, then called to Marcus. "Communications are down. No static, no signal. Complete dead zone." Elaine checked her satellite phone. Nothing. GPS units showed no signal. All 5 of us experienced the same equipment failure simultaneously, which was virtually impossible under normal circumstances. Multiple redundant systems using different technologies don't fail at once without cause. "We're leaving now." Marcus's tone left no room for discussion. He pointed back the way we had come up the slope toward the ridge. Same formation as before, but tighter intervals, 5 meters maximum between personnel. We began our ascent out of the valley. The silence pressed against us, became a tangible thing. The air felt heavier with each step, as if the normal composition of the atmosphere had changed. Breathing required more effort. Movement felt sluggish. The temperature, which had been mild throughout the morning, dropped noticeably. I checked my thermometer, 42 degrees Fahrenheit. It had been 64 degrees Fahrenheit less than 30 minutes earlier. Robert, still on point, stopped abruptly after about 20 minutes of climbing. The rest of us halted behind him. He was staring at something ahead on the slope. I moved up beside him to see what had caught his attention. A shoe, a single hiking boot, modern design, expensive brand, lying on its side in the middle of what should have been our return path. Marcus approached it carefully, squatted down without touching it. "That's not where we came through," he said quietly. "We didn't pass this on the way down." He was right. We had maintained a careful route, noting landmarks. This section of forest was unfamiliar. The trees were older here, enormous trunks stretching upward, their canopies blocking most of the sunlight. The ground was covered with a thick layer of moss rather than the mixed undergrowth we had traversed earlier. "We veered off course," Teresa suggested, unfolding her paper map, a backup to the GPS units. But after studying it for a moment, her expression changed. "This doesn't match. These contour lines." She looked up at the surrounding terrain. "This isn't right. The valley doesn't narrow this way on any topographical survey." Marcus made a decision. "New bearing, due east for half a mile, then reassess." East would eventually intersect with known trails, regardless of our current precise location. It was a standard wilderness navigation technique when disoriented. Pick a cardinal direction that will eventually cross a linear landmark like a road, river, or trail. We left the boot untouched and began moving east, or what our compasses indicated was east. The forest continued to change around us. The trees grew more twisted, their trunks occasionally intersecting in impossible ways, forming natural archways and barriers. The moss underfoot thickened, becoming spongy and giving off a faint luminescence in the deepening shadows. The temperature continued to drop. My thermometer now read 36 degrees Fahrenheit. After what should have been half a mile according to our pace count, we found No trail, no clearing, nothing to indicate we were approaching the known sections of the park. Instead, the forest opened into a small circular clearing about 30 feet in diameter. The ground at its center was bare soil. No moss, no undergrowth, just exposed dark earth that appeared disturbed, as if recently dug. Elaine approached the bare patch cautiously, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding caution. She knelt at its edge, reaching out to touch the soil. "It's warm," she said with surprise, "significantly warmer than the surrounding air." She pulled a soil thermometer from her pack and inserted it into the ground. When she checked the reading, her eyes widened. 58 degrees. That's not right. Not at this depth, not with the air temperature so low. Robert had not approached the clearing. He stood at its edge, utterly still, his gaze fixed not on the ground, but on the trees on the far side. I followed his eyeline, but saw nothing unusual, just more twisted trunks and moss-covered ground. "We should keep moving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should not stay here." Marcus nodded, trusting Robert's instincts as well as his own growing unease. "Skirt the clearing, continue east." As we moved around the perimeter of the circular space, the sound began. Not loud at first, just on the edge of perception. A low humming, not mechanical, but not quite organic either. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the air itself was vibrating at a frequency just below normal human hearing. I felt it more than heard it, a pressure against my eardrums, a vibration in my chest cavity. The others felt it too. Teresa pressed her palms against her ears. Elaine checked her audio equipment, which registered the sound but couldn't identify its source or precise frequency. Marcus signaled for silence and stillness, trying to locate the direction of the sound. But it had no direction. It surrounded us completely. The humming grew louder, more insistent. The pressure increased. My sinuses ached. I tasted copper on the back of my tongue. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees in the span of seconds. Our breath began to fog in front of our faces, and then we saw it, or rather, we saw what it did to the forest. On the far side of the clearing, the trees began to bend, not sway as in a wind, but bend, as if space itself was distorting around them. The trunks curved inward, the branches twisted downward. The moss on the ground rippled like water. The air between the trees seemed to thicken, to darken, to gather itself into a shape that had no fixed form. "Move," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the humming. "Now, don't run. Stay together." We retreated from the clearing, continuing east but at a faster pace. The humming followed us. The temperature continued to drop. 28 degrees Fahrenheit now. Impossible for the season and elevation. Frost began to form on the vegetation around us. Our breath came in visible clouds. The light dimmed further, though my watch showed it was only mid-afternoon. We walked for what felt like hours, but could only have been 45 minutes, according to my watch. The forest grew denser around us, the trees more contorted, their trunks occasionally groaning, as if under great pressure. The humming never ceased, sometimes fading slightly only to return with renewed intensity. We maintained our formation. Robert on point, Marcus behind him, then Teresa, Elaine and me at the rear. 5 meters between each person. No one spoke except for occasional navigation commands from Marcus. Then Robert stopped again. We all halted behind him. Before us stood what appeared to be a natural stone formation, a semicircle of upright stones, each about 4 feet tall, partially embedded in the earth. They were covered in thick moss, but beneath it I could make out markings, not random weathering patterns, but deliberate carvings, symbols I didn't recognize. Robert approached the stones slowly. He reached out and gently brushed moss from one of the carvings. His hand trembled slightly. "Boundary markers," he said quietly. My grandfather described these. They were placed by medicine men from many tribes, not just Cherokee. "Older. Boundary of what?" Teresa asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. Robert didn't answer directly. He looked back at us, his expression grave. "We went the wrong way. We're deeper in now." The humming intensified suddenly, becoming a physical force that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The air between the stone markers shimmered, like heat rising from hot pavement, but it was cold, so cold now that the moisture on my eyelashes was freezing. Marcus made a swift decision. Back the way we came. Double time. We turned and began moving rapidly back along our own trail. The forest had closed in behind us. The path we had broken just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by dense undergrowth and twisted trees that couldn't possibly have grown so quickly. We were forced to create a new path, pushing through vegetation that seemed to resist our passage. The light faded further, taking on a greenish tinge that made depth perception difficult. The trees blurred together in my peripheral vision, seeming to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The humming pulsed now, growing louder, then softer in a rhythm that almost matched my heartbeat, but not quite, creating a dissonance that made concentration difficult. We walked for another 30 minutes, pushing our pace as much as the terrain allowed. According to all laws of geography and our own knowledge of the park, we should have reached a recognizable landmark by now. A trail, a ridge, something. Instead, the forest grew more alien with each step. The trees were wrong. Their bark was too smooth, the patterns of branching incorrect for any species native to the Smokies. The moss emitted a stronger luminescence, pulsing in time with the humming. "Water," Elaine said suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the trees I could make out the glint of a water surface, too large for the stream we had crossed earlier. As we approached cautiously, we saw it was a pond, perfectly circular, about 50 feet across. Its water was black but reflective, mirroring the twisted trees and dim sky above. There was no vegetation at its edge, just bare soil transitioning to water with no intermediate zone of aquatic plants as would be normal. Marcus consulted his compass again, then the map Teresa carried. Neither made sense in the context of what we were seeing. This pond didn't exist on any park survey or map. We should not have encountered a water feature of this size in this area. We need to go around it, Marcus decided. Keep it on our right, maintain visual contact with each other. We began to skirt the pond's edge. The humming changed pitch, becoming higher, more insistent. The water's surface remained perfectly still, unnaturally so. No ripples, no movement, despite the intermittent breeze that now whispered through the trees. I was the first to notice the footprints. They emerged from the pond, distinct human boot prints leading from the water onto the shore, as if someone had walked out of the pond. They were fresh, the soil still damp and not fully settled into the impressions. They led away from the water into the forest, in the direction we were heading. I called Marcus's attention to them. He examined them briefly, his expression grim, recent, heavy individual. These weren't here when we arrived at the pond. Someone circled behind us. The implications of his statement chilled me more than the unnatural cold. We had maintained a careful watch behind us during our retreat. No one could have passed us unnoticed to leave tracks ahead of us, unless they had come from the pond itself. "It's Michael," Teresa suggested, her voice hopeful but uncertain. "It has to be. He's alive, moving through the same area." No one contradicted her, but I saw the doubt in Marcus's eyes. The boot prints were the right size for an adult male, but there was something wrong about their spacing, their depth. They were too evenly spaced. The right and left impressions exactly the same distance apart for each stride. No human walks with such mechanical precision, especially not on uneven forest ground. We followed the tracks cautiously, maintaining our formation. The humming grew louder again, the pressure building in my ears until I felt they might bleed. The light dimmed further, though according to my watch it should have been only mid-afternoon. Soon we were walking in near darkness, the bioluminescent moss providing the only reliable illumination. Our flashlights worked, but their beams seemed absorbed by the gloom after just a few feet. The tracks led us to another clearing, larger than the first, perhaps 100 feet across, and there, in its center, we found Michael Strand, or what remained of him. He was seated on the ground, back perfectly straight, legs extended in front of him. His hiking clothes were intact, showing no signs of tearing or damage. His backpack, a second one, presumably a day pack separate from the one we had found earlier, sat beside him, neatly closed. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead. His skin was pale, bloodless. Elaine approached him first, medical training overriding caution. She touched his neck, checking for a pulse, then drew back sharply. "He's cold. No pulse, but no rigor mortis. No signs of decomposition." She examined him more carefully, her scientific detachment wavering. No visible cause of death, no injuries, no signs of animal activity. Marcus inspected the ground around the body while Teresa documented the scene with her camera. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of how Michael had reached this spot or what had killed him. His boots matched the tracks we had followed, yet the positioning of his body suggested he had been placed here rather than having walked to this spot and collapsed. Robert stood at the edge of the clearing, unwilling to approach the body. I joined him there, feeling the same reluctance. The humming was loudest here, the pressure almost unbearable. The air felt thick, resistant, as if we were moving through water rather than atmosphere. "We need to report this and bring in a recovery team," Marcus said, his voice struggling to maintain its professional tone. "This is now a potential crime scene." He turned to Teresa. Try the radio again. Try everything. Teresa attempted all our communication devices again. Nothing worked. Not the radios, not the satellite phone, not the emergency beacons. We were completely cut off. We need to mark this location as precisely as possible and begin evacuation with the body, Marcus decided. It was standard procedure. Recover the deceased if it could be done safely. We had body bags and a collapsible stretcher as part of our equipment. With 5 of us, carrying Michael out was feasible, if strenuous. As we prepared the body for transport, I noticed Robert growing increasingly agitated. He kept looking at the trees surrounding the clearing, his body tense, ready to move. I followed his gaze but saw nothing, just the same twisted trunks and luminescent moss. Yet something was different. The quality of the darkness had changed. It was deeper between the trees, more concentrated, as if the darkness itself had weight and substance. The humming stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the sound had been. I could hear my own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. I could hear the others breathing. I could hear the soft sounds of Elaine and Marcus preparing the body bag. Nothing else. No forest sounds, no wind, nothing. "It's here," Robert said, so quietly I barely heard him. He wasn't looking at any specific spot now, but his body was coiled tight, ready to run or fight. "It's watching us." I felt it too, the weight of attention, of focus. Something was observing us with an intelligence that felt ancient and alien. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, just beyond the edge of perception, studying us with cold curiosity. Marcus sensed the change too. He straightened from his work with Michael's body, scanning the tree line. "Everyone close in. Form a defensive circle, back to back." We obeyed instantly, moving into position around Michael's body. Marcus unholstered his service pistol, a last resort in normal search and rescue operations, carried primarily for protection from aggressive wildlife. The rest of us were unarmed, except for standard-issue knives. We stood in silence, straining to see into the unnatural darkness between the trees. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. The cold intensified, biting through our layers of technical clothing. My extremities began to ache with it. Teresa saw it first. A movement in the darkness, not a shape exactly, but a shifting of the shadows, a concentration of the absence of light. She raised her hand, pointing silently. We all turned to look. Between 2 massive, twisted tree trunks, the darkness gathered itself. It didn't step forward or emerge. It simply became more present, more defined. A vertical mass of deeper black against the surrounding gloom. Taller than a man, much taller. 8 feet at least, possibly more. Its proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, torso too narrow. It had a head, or something like a head, but I couldn't make out features. Just an absence where features should be. Elaine's scientific mind was still functioning despite her fear. She raised her camera slowly, activated the flash, and took a photograph. The flash momentarily illuminated the clearing and the figure between the trees. I wish she hadn't done that. I wish I hadn't seen it clearly. In the brief, harsh light of the camera flash, I saw that what we were facing wasn't simply darkness or shadow. It had physical form, substance. Its body was impossibly thin, the limbs elongated and jointed in too many places. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a deep matte black that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Not the brown black of human skin, but the absolute black of deep ocean trenches. It had no face as we understand the concept, no nose, no mouth visible in that frozen moment of illumination, just eyes. 3 of them, arranged in a triangle pattern, large, perfectly round, and filled with a milky white substance that reflected the camera flash like a deer's eyes caught in headlights. The flash seemed to affect it. The figure recoiled, a movement so fast it blurred even in that brief illumination. Then the light was gone, and with it the figure. The space between the trees was empty again. "Move," Marcus ordered, his voice a harsh whisper. "Back the way we came. Now. Leave the body." We abandoned our equipment and Michael's body, forming a tight group as we retreated from the clearing. Marcus took the lead, his pistol drawn. Teresa behind him, then Elaine, Robert, and me bringing up the rear. We moved as quickly as the terrain and darkness allowed, heading away from the clearing in the direction we believed would lead us back to the pond. We had gone perhaps 200 yards when the humming resumed, louder now, more insistent, the vibration strong enough to make my vision blur. The darkness between the trees shifted and flowed, as if the shadows themselves were alive and moving independently of their sources. The temperature plummeted further. The moisture in my breath froze instantly, falling as tiny ice crystals. Robert, just ahead of me, stopped suddenly. I nearly collided with him. He was staring to our left, into a particularly dense section of forest. I followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, just twisted trees and glowing moss. Then I realized one of the trees wasn't a tree. It was too straight, too still, its proportions all wrong. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the figure standing motionless among the actual trees, its height and thinness allowing it to mimic their form until you looked directly at it. I tried to alert the others, but my voice failed me. Robert began to back away, slowly pushing me behind him. The figure remained motionless, those milky white eyes now visible even in the darkness, reflecting the faint bioluminescence of the moss. Then it moved, not toward us, but upward, straight up the trunk of the nearest tree, its impossible limbs propelling it with a speed and fluidity that defied physics. It disappeared into the canopy above. The humming intensified, becoming a physical pressure that made my skull feel like it might crack. "It's hurting us," Elaine said suddenly, her voice tight with the effort of speaking against the pressure. "It's driving us in a specific direction." She was right. I could feel it now, the subtle pressure influencing our choices, the path of least resistance always leading in one direction, away from safety, deeper into the unknown territory. We had been manipulated from the moment we entered the valley. Marcus made a critical decision. We go against the pressure. Whatever direction feels hardest to move in, that's our way out. We altered our course, pushing against the increasing resistance of both terrain and the inexplicable force that sought to control our movement. The forest itself seemed to fight us. Branches whipped at our faces despite the lack of wind. Roots rose from the ground to trip us. The moss turned slippery underfoot. The humming built to a painful intensity. We reached the edge of another clearing, not one we had seen before. This one was perfectly circular, perhaps 200 feet across. Its center was occupied by a stone structure, a rough circle of standing stones similar to the boundary markers Robert had identified, but larger, more deliberate in their placement. The ground within the stone circle was bare earth, dark and disturbed, as if recently dug, just like the smaller clearing we had found earlier. The humming stopped again. The silence was immediate and complete. Not even the sound of our breathing penetrated it. It was as if we had gone deaf, or as if sound itself had ceased to exist. Across the clearing, at the far edge of the stone circle, stood the figure, fully visible now despite the darkness. It was even taller than I had estimated, perhaps 10 feet in height. Its limbs hung almost to the ground despite its height, the joints bending in directions that made no anatomical sense. The 3 white eyes stared at us, unblinking. And it was not alone. To its right stood a second figure, similar in its impossible proportions but slightly smaller. To its left, a third, smaller, still larger than any human. Behind them, partially obscured by the darkness, I could sense more of them. A gathering, a group, a family or pack or whatever term might apply to such creatures. They made no move toward us. They simply watched, those milky white eyes fixed on our group with an intelligence that felt older than humanity itself. Marcus raised his pistol, aiming at the largest figure. His hand was steady despite the impossibility of what we faced. "Back away slowly," he instructed us. "Stay together. Do not run." We began to retreat, step by careful step, maintaining our formation. The figures remained motionless, watching. 20 feet from the edge of the clearing, 30 feet, 40. The forest closed around us again, the twisted trees blocking our view of the standing stones and the gathering of entities. Then Teresa screamed. It was the first time I had ever heard her voice rise above a conversational tone. I spun toward the sound and saw her being lifted upward, her body rising into the canopy as if pulled by invisible hands. In the dim light of the moss below, I caught a glimpse of what held her. Long black limbs wrapped around her torso, impossibly thin but strong enough to lift her weight without effort. She disappeared into the darkness above, her scream cutting off abruptly. "Teresa!" Marcus shouted, firing his weapon into the canopy. The gunshots were shockingly loud after the unnatural silence, but they had no visible effect. There was no sound of impact, no cry of pain, nothing to indicate the bullets had found a target. "Run!" Robert yelled, grabbing my arm. "Don't look up! Run!" We ran. All semblance of formation was lost. We crashed through the forest, pushing past branches, stumbling over roots, desperate to escape what hunted us from above. The humming resumed, louder than ever, the pressure in my head building until I tasted blood on my tongue. I lost sight of the others briefly as the forest grew denser. When I broke through into a small opening, I found myself alone. I stopped, gasping for breath, trying to orient myself. The humming subsided slightly, allowing me to think. I called out for the others, my voice sounding sounding thin and weak in the oppressive atmosphere. Robert appeared at the edge of the opening, his face pale in the dim light. "This way," he gasped, waving me toward him. "I can see water ahead, the pond. We need to circle back." I followed him, relief flooding through me at not being alone. We pushed through another dense patch of forest, the branches seeming to grab at our clothing, holding us back. Then we emerged at the edge of the pond we had discovered earlier, the perfectly circular, black water, still and reflective despite the breeze that now moved through the trees. Marcus and Elaine were already there, standing at the water's edge, flashlights scanning the surrounding forest. Marcus's face was streaked with blood from branch cuts. Elaine's left arm hung at an awkward angle, possibly broken. They looked up as we approached, relief visible on their faces. "Teresa?" Elaine asked, her voice cracking. Robert shook his head. The implication was clear. Teresa was gone. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Follow the pond edge, then continue east. These things seem to prefer the forest canopy. Stay in the open when possible." We began moving again, staying close to the pond's edge where the trees thinned out. The water remained unnaturally still despite our passage along its shore. The humming faded to a background vibration, still present but less painful. The cold remained intense, my fingers and toes now numb within my boots and gloves. We had circled perhaps a quarter of the pond's circumference when Elaine stopped abruptly. "Look at the water," she said, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding fear. "It's changing." The perfectly black surface of the pond had begun to lighten in one specific area, a circular patch about 6 feet in diameter, gradually shifting from black to dark gray to a milky white that matched the eyes of the creatures pursuing us. The patch was moving slowly toward the shore where we stood. "Keep moving," Marcus ordered, urging us along the shoreline, away from the approaching disturbance in the water. We picked up our pace, staying close together, continually scanning both the forest canopy above us and the water beside us. The white patch kept pace with us, moving parallel to our position along the shore. It maintained a constant distance of about 15 feet from the water's edge. As we watched, it began to rise, not breaking the surface with splashing, but emerging smoothly, the water flowing off its surface as if repelled. What rose from the pond was not water, but something solid that had been beneath it. A curved, white surface, smooth and unmarked, rose about 2 feet above the water level and then stopped. It remained there, partially emerged, the water around it still unnaturally calm. Robert grabbed my arm, pulling me faster along the shoreline. "Don't look at it," he hissed. "Don't acknowledge it." We continued our circuit of the pond, the white dome keeping pace with us just offshore. The humming intensified again, focused now, directed, as if a beam of sound was targeting us specifically. The pressure built in my head, behind my eyes, in my sinuses, until I felt my consciousness beginning to fragment. We had completed perhaps half the circuit of the pond when the forest to our right erupted with movement. Something large and fast burst from between the trees, moving in a blur of elongated limbs and impossible angles. It struck Marcus before he could raise his weapon, lifting him bodily from the ground and carrying him back into the forest in a single fluid motion that took less than 2 seconds. I heard his cry, cut off mid-sound. I heard the crack of breaking branches as his body was carried upward into the canopy. Then silence again. Elaine, Robert, and I froze, paralyzed by the speed and precision of the attack. The white dome in the pond had stopped moving as well, remaining stationary about 15 feet offshore. The humming pulsed, rhythmic now, almost like a heartbeat. "Don't separate," Robert whispered. "Whatever happens, stay together." We continued moving, now just 3 of us, pressed so close our shoulders touched. We abandoned the idea of circling the pond and instead headed directly away from it, toward what we hoped was the eastern edge of the forest. The ground began to slope upward, a good sign, potentially leading to higher elevations where the park boundaries and trails would be. The forest grew less dense as we climbed, the twisted trees giving way to more normal growth patterns. The moss thinned out, its bioluminescence fading. We began to hope, to believe we might be approaching the edge of whatever territory these things claimed as their own. Then Elaine stumbled. Her injured arm threw off her balance on the uneven ground, causing her to fall slightly behind Robert and me. It was only a few feet, only for a moment. I turned back to help her, reaching out my hand. She never took it. From directly above her, a long black limb descended, not from a branch, but from what appeared to be empty air, as if the darkness itself had solidified and reached down. It wrapped around her waist, constricting with sudden force. Elaine had time for one sharp intake of breath before she was yanked upward with such speed that my eyes couldn't follow the movement. One moment she was there, looking at my outstretched hand with an expression of resigned understanding. The next she was gone, the darkness above unbroken broken and silent. Robert grabbed me, preventing me from calling out or trying to follow her. His grip was painfully tight, his face inches from mine. "Run," he breathed, the word barely audible. "Don't look back." We ran. Up the slope, through forest that gradually became more familiar, more natural. The humming faded behind us. The air warmed slightly. We began to see signs of normal wildlife. A startled grouse, spider webs between branches, insect activity in the undergrowth. Hope surged through me. We were escaping. We were finding our way out. We reached a ridgeline as the last of the daylight faded from the sky. Below us stretched a valley I recognized, not the one we had entered, but a familiar part of the park about 4 miles northeast of our original search area. Somehow we had crossed a significant distance without realizing it, or the forest itself had shifted around us, delivering us to a different location than where we had entered. "We made it," I said, my voice hoarse from exertion and the lingering effects of the humming. "That's Pigeon Creek down there. There's a ranger station 6 miles north along that ridge." Robert didn't respond. He was looking back the way we had come, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual, just the forest we had emerged from, normal looking now in the fading light. "We need to keep moving," he said finally. Reached the station before full dark. We continued along the ridgeline, moving as quickly as our exhausted bodies allowed. The temperature was normal for April in the Smokies, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping with the sunset. The forest sounds were normal too. The first tentative calls of spring peepers, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Night fell completely as we approached what should have been the halfway point to the ranger station. We used our flashlights now, the beams cutting through the natural darkness rather than being absorbed as they had been in the other forest. We maintained a steady pace, climbing over fallen logs, pushing through rhododendron thickets, fording small streams. The first sign that something was wrong came when I realized I couldn't hear Robert's footsteps anymore. I stopped, turning my flashlight to illuminate the trail behind me. He was gone. There had been no sound, no cry for help, no indication of a struggle. One moment he had been behind me, the next he wasn't. "Robert?" I called, my voice echoing slightly in the night forest. No response. "Robert!" Louder now, panic edging into my tone. The humming began again, distant at first, then rapidly growing closer, louder, more insistent. The pressure returned, building inside my skull. The temperature dropped, my breath suddenly visible in the beam of my flashlight. The normal forest sounds ceased abruptly. They had followed us, or they had been waiting for us, or they had somehow brought us back to their territory through some manipulation of space I couldn't comprehend. I ran. Abandoning the ridgeline trail, I plunged downslope, crashing through undergrowth, sliding down steep sections, using trees to control my descent. The humming pursued me, always just behind, always growing slightly louder. The forest darkened around me despite my flashlight, the beam weakening, the darkness thickening. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, perhaps. I fell countless times, collected dozens of cuts and bruises, lost my pack somewhere along the way. I kept only my flashlight, clutching it like a talisman, though its beam grew increasingly ineffective against the unnatural darkness. Eventually, I broke through into an open area, a forest service road, narrow and unimproved but clearly human-made. The humming stopped at the edge of the forest, as if unable or unwilling to follow me onto this manifestation of human presence and control. The temperature rose immediately, returning to a normal April night. My flashlight beam strengthened, illuminating the gravel surface of the road clearly. I stood in the middle of the road, gasping for breath, waiting for the attack I was certain would come. Nothing emerged from the forest edge. The darkness there remained absolute, impenetrable, but it did not advance onto the road. I began walking along the gravel track, putting distance between myself and the forest edge, never taking my eyes off the tree line. Dawn found me still walking, miles from where I had emerged. Lacerations, barely able to form coherent lacerations, barely able to form coherent sentences. I told them about the others, about the missing hiker whose body we had found, about Teresa being pulled into the canopy, about Marcus being taken from the pond edge, about Elaine's impossible vertical extraction, about Robert's silent disappearance. I told them about the entities, their impossible anatomy, their white eyes, their control of the forest. I told them about the humming, the pressure, the unnatural cold. They organized search parties, of course, multiple teams, dozens of personnel, police involvement, helicopter surveys. They found nothing, no bodies, no equipment, no signs of our presence in the valley. The coordinates I provided guided, led them to completely normal sections of forest with no circular ponds, no standing stones, no clearings with disturbed earth. The official explanation was that I had become disoriented after the group separated during a flash flood event in one of the streams we had crossed, that I had experienced hallucinations due to hypothermia and trauma, that the others had likely been swept away by the same flash flood, their bodies carried into caves or caught in underwater root systems, explaining the lack of discovery despite extensive searching. I resigned from the park service as soon as I was physically able. I could not return to those mountains knowing what waited in the unmarked valleys. I moved west as far from the Appalachians as I could reasonably go. I live on the edge of the Navajo Nation now, where the elders understand when I tell them what I saw. They have different names for such things, different stories, but they recognize the truth in mine. They call these entities Yi-na-ald-lu-shi, skinwalkers, though they caution me that this is just the closest approximation in their tradition. What we encountered was older, they say. One elder told me that the Cherokee called them Nun-Yunu-Wi, the stone people, or the immortals, ancient beings that were here before humans, that will be here after we are gone, not evil in the human sense, but utterly alien, operating according to principles and purposes we cannot comprehend. I tell you this as a warning. There are places in those mountains, in all mountains perhaps, that are not meant for us, places that have never been truly claimed by humanity despite our maps and trails and confident explorations, places where the old ones still move freely, still hunt, still maintain territories we unknowingly cross at our peril. The official maps won't help you identify these places. The official explanations won't acknowledge their existence, but the local people know. The tribal elders know. The quiet old man at the general store who suggests a different trail when you mention your planned route, he knows. I still hear the humming sometimes in my dreams. I still feel the pressure building behind my eyes. I still see those white, reflective eyes watching from between trees that bend in ways trees should not bend. And I wonder often if they are still there in those unmarked valleys, or if they have begun to move more freely through the world now that they know how easily we can be taken. I wonder if they are watching me even now, waiting for me to let down my guard, to venture too deep into the desert, too far from the protective circle of Navajo settlements. I wonder if what we encountered was just one small family group of something much more widespread, much more numerous than we can imagine. Listen to the silence when you're in the wild places. Pay attention when the birds stop singing, when the insects fall quiet, when the air grows suddenly cold on a warm day, and if you feel a pressure in your head, a humming that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, run toward human places, toward roads and buildings and the artificial light that they seem to avoid. Run and don't look back, don't look up. Keep your eyes on the path ahead and hope that you're faster, luckier than my friends were.